The morning air was crisp, sharp with the metallic tang of early winter, and the bass buzzed with the usual chaotic energy of boots on gravel, shouted commands, and the rhythmic clatter of rifles being loaded and unloaded. Sergeant Lena Torres had been part of the unit for nearly 4 years, a reputation built on precision, reliability, and a stubborn streak no one dared challenge. Yet today, the tension in the air was different. She could feel it before she even stepped into the training yard, an almost electric anticipation, like the calm before a storm. The squad was gathered in formation, their faces a mix of fatigue and smug amusement. Among them were some of the same men who had quietly mocked her skills during exercises, the ones who had whispered doubts about her abilities behind her back. Today, it seemed, they had found an opportunity to assert themselves, to prove that Lena, despite her experience, was still just one of the girls in their eyes. Captain Reynolds, normally stern but fair, called the morning drill to order. Lena stood rigid, hands clasped behind her back, scanning her team. The training exercise was simple: marksmanship under pressure, a timed sequence simulating a hostile environment. Each member would fire at moving targets while navigating obstacles designed to mimic real combat conditions. Lena had done this drill countless times, often scoring at the top. But today, the atmosphere was different. Torres, step forward, one of the senior corporals barked, a smirk tugging at his lips. Lena obeyed, her boots crunching against the frost-hardened ground. Before she could even react, the corporal reached for her rifle. "Not today," he said, his tone mocking. "Let's see how you do without it." Shock rippled through Lena for a fraction of a second before anger surged. The rifle had been an extension of her arm for years. Every round fired, every maneuver executed, built a rhythm between her and the weapon that no one else could replicate. Now, it was being wrenched from her grasp, not out of necessity, but to humiliate her. "Give it back," she said evenly, trying to mask the flare of fury in her chest. "Relax, Torres. We just want to see you try," he said, chuckling as he held it just out of reach. The rest of the squad laughed quietly, their amusement thinly veiled as if they were all in on a joke Lena hadn't been invited to. For a heartbeat, Lena considered walking away, letting the drill pass and proving that she didn't need validation from these men. But something inside her refused to be demeaned. She had trained for years, endured far worse, and survived situations where humiliation was a luxury she couldn't afford. She squared her shoulders, her eyes locking onto the corporal's with a cold intensity that made him pause. "Fine," she said, her voice calm but icy. "No rifle. I'll show you how it's done anyway." The corporal raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting her to stumble, but Lena's mind was already racing through strategy. She moved with the same precision she used in marksmanship drills, counting her steps, anticipating the target movements, and calculating angles in her head. Her body obeyed instinctively. She dove behind barriers, rolled across the frozen ground, and fired imaginary rounds at targets that weren't even there, relying entirely on her knowledge of timing, rhythm, and positioning. The squad watched, initially amused, then incredulous, as Lena's movements mirrored those of someone armed. Her footwork was flawless, her hand signals precise, and her tactical awareness unmatched. Even without the rifle, she seemed to command the field, moving like a shadow that couldn't be pinned down. A few of the younger soldiers whispered among themselves, doubt creeping in. The corporal holding her rifle felt a sudden shift in tension. The power he thought he had was evaporating in the cold morning air. Lena's eyes never left the enemy targets, never once betraying hesitation. Every motion screamed experience and confidence, and the laughter around her started to die down. By the time the drill concluded, Lena had maneuvered through the entire course, completing every challenge flawlessly, without a single misstep. The rifle was returned to her silently, but the smugness in the corporal's eyes had dimmed. The squad, which had gathered to witness her humiliation, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and something approaching fear. Lena didn't celebrate or speak. She simply checked her gear, straightened her uniform, and walked off the field, her mind already moving to the next challenge. Even in that moment, she knew the real test was yet to come. The humiliation had been a spark, but the fire was waiting just over the horizon, and she was ready. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training ground, turning every obstacle into a looming challenge. Lena stood at the edge of the course, rifle back in hand, her senses sharp. The earlier humiliation had sparked something, not anger, exactly, but a focused intensity. She could feel the undercurrent of tension in her squad, the way the men exchanged uneasy glances whenever her eyes swept over them. What they thought would embarrass her had only sharpened her awareness, honed her instincts. Captain Reynolds blew the whistle, signaling the start of the next exercise. This one was different, a simulation of a hostile incursion where the squad had to neutralize a target, secure the perimeter, and extract safely under timed conditions. Lena noticed the same corporal who had taken her rifle earlier smirk at her, as if to say, "Let's see how you handle this one." He clearly underestimated her, and that would be his mistake. The squad moved out together, rifles at the ready. Lena stayed at the center, observing every movement, every misstep. Almost immediately, she saw the cracks forming. The men who had laughed at her earlier were overconfident, rushing through obstacles without properly checking corners or cover points. Their coordination was sloppy, their communication fragmented. Lena's pulse remained steady as she silently adjusted positions, signaling corrections with subtle gestures that only a trained eye would notice. Halfway through the course, disaster struck. One of the junior soldiers tripped a simulated tripwire, a motion sensor designed to trigger the enemy response. In a split second, the exercise escalated. Smoke canisters erupted, sirens blared, and the squad panicked. Shouts rang out as some soldiers froze, unsure where to move, while others blindly fired in random directions. Lena's mind clicked into action. Every training scenario she had drilled for years flashed through her consciousness. She moved with precision, guiding the squad without uttering a word, her own weapon a lifeline to the chaos. The corporal who had humiliated her earlier froze behind a barricade, fumbling to reload his rifle. Lena assessed the danger and realized that in a real situation, hesitation like his could have fatal consequences. She moved silently, swiftly, and decisively, covering his blind spots with controlled bursts of fire. The junior soldiers followed her lead instinctively, their earlier bravado replaced with reliance on her expertise. Minutes felt like hours. Lena navigated the squad through collapsing obstacles, dodging simulated gunfire, and directing movements with a series of hand signals and quick commands. The unit, once confident and cocky, was now utterly dependent on her. The corporal's smirk had vanished entirely. He looked at her with wide eyes, the earlier contempt replaced by stark realization. As they approached the extraction point, Lena spotted the final challenge, a narrow bridge flanked by enemy sentries simulated with automated targets. The squad hesitated. Panic rippled through the men like a tangible force. Lena's mind raced. She couldn't let their hesitation cost them the exercise, or in real life, lives. She made a rapid decision, leaping onto the bridge herself, moving with flawless rhythm, firing only when necessary, drawing simulated fire away from her squad. Her courage and skill galvanized the men. One by one, they followed, still shaky but moving with newfound respect for the woman they had tried to humiliate just hours before. Lena's presence had become the linchpin of their operation. Without her, the unit was vulnerable, exposed. She reached the far end, signaling the successful extraction, and for a moment, the chaos seemed to freeze. Breathing hard, Lena looked at her squad. They were shaken, tense, and silent. The corporal who had mocked her held his rifle loosely, eyes downcast. The unspoken truth hung in the air. They had underestimated her at their peril. What was supposed to be a simple training exercise had become a harsh lesson in leadership, skill, and the consequences of arrogance. Lena collected herself, surveying the group. She didn't gloat, that wasn't her style. But she made sure they understood the stakes, the importance of discipline and respect. The humiliation from earlier was nothing compared to the stark clarity of survival, and she had shown them both in under 5 minutes. Captain Reynolds approached, nodding approvingly. Lena met his gaze, the faintest trace of a smile crossing her face. She knew the final test awaited them tomorrow, and this time, there would be no room for mistakes. The tension simmered in the cold air, a warning that the ultimate reckoning was coming, and Lena was ready. The next day, the squad assembled for what was billed as a final evaluation, but Lena knew better. This was more than a drill, it was a test of every instinct, every skill, every decision she had honed over years of training and battlefield experience. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every movement feel deliberate. Her earlier humiliation still lingered in the minds of the men, especially the corporal who had snatched her rifle, but Lena's resolve was unshakable. Captain Reynolds gave the orders, brief and concise. Simulate a hostile incursion, locate a high-value target, neutralize the threat, and exit safely. The course had been upgraded overnight with new obstacles, automated, enemy, units, and unpredictable traps designed to test reaction time. Lena surveyed the terrain, noting vantage points, choke points, and potential ambush zones. Every detail mattered. The squad moved forward, tension already making hands shake. Almost immediately, chaos erupted. One of the junior soldiers tripped a sensor near the entry zone, triggering alarms and a flurry of simulated gunfire. Lena's eyes scanned the environment, instantly calculating the safest paths and how to manipulate the enemy to her advantage. She moved fluidly, taking the lead, issuing rapid-fire commands with hand signals and subtle nods that her squad now instinctively understood. The corporal who had mocked her earlier froze at a corner, his hesitation costly. Lena made a split-second decision. She darted forward, drawing simulated fire directly toward herself, creating an opening for the rest of the squad. Her movements were precise, controlled, almost like a dance with danger. Every roll, dive, and calculated step minimized exposure while maximizing effect. By the midpoint of the course, it was clear, Lena had taken full control. The squad, once cocky and dismissive, was now tethered entirely to her lead. They followed her without hesitation, reacting to threats almost instinctively under her guidance. The corporal's smirk was gone, replaced by a mixture of fear and awe. His earlier attempt to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly. The unit was now only as effective as Lena allowed it to be. Then came the final challenge, a narrow corridor lined with obstacles and automated hostiles, set to trigger lethal responses if mismanaged. Lena paused at the entrance, analyzing every angle. She knew one wrong step could take out half the squad in the simulation. With a calm breath, she led the way, moving with surgical precision. Each soldier followed her lead, covering angles she anticipated, clearing threats before they could react. The unit's earlier arrogance had evaporated completely, replaced by a newfound respect for her skill and intuition. The exercise culminated at the extraction point, where a high-value target awaited. Lena positioned herself strategically, neutralizing simulated threats with exact timing. The squad, now coordinated and disciplined under her leadership, secured the target flawlessly. What had begun as a day designed to humiliate her ended as a demonstration of her unmatched ability to control, protect, and lead under pressure. Captain Reynolds approached, nodding with an approving smile. The corporal who had tried to demean her looked down, no words to justify his arrogance. Lena finally exhaled, the tension in her body easing. She hadn't just survived. She had turned the entire situation on its head, teaching the squad a lesson in humility, respect, and the consequences of underestimating someone based on ego alone. As the squad disbanded, Lena walked to the edge of the field, glancing at the camera setup for the training recap. Her voice, calm but firm, carried across the speakers. "If there's one thing you should take away from today," she said, "it's that skill, focus, and respect matter more than arrogance. Never underestimate anyone based on appearances or assumptions. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories of courage, resilience, and people proving their worth, subscribe to her story's words. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next." The camera lingered on her as she nodded once, a subtle smile on her face. The squad, now silent and reflective, dispersed into the afternoon light, each carrying a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Lena stayed for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle over the field, knowing she had turned humiliation into triumph in the most definitive way possible.